Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he was the person that actually did the burn, and he donated his services and his services of others within his company. So obviously, very, very excited about all those donations. Item C1, every single year, a supplemental contract is a one-year contract, okay? It automatically non-renews. But a supplemental contract assumes that a teacher is filling that supplemental contract. Well, a lot of our teachers don't fill our supplementals, so we hire non-teaching. According to Ohio Revised Code, they are not supplementals. They are the primary contract of service. So we have to non-renew them by formal action every single year. So we will start to do this every single year at this time. We notified people ahead of time. They can reapply for their same positions, but it's just a level of protection to make sure that the contract is initiated and terminated within the guidelines of Ohio Revised Code. We have 3 administrative contracts, Mr. Morris, Mr. Jarrett, and Mr. Sexton. We have 2 retirements, Pam Thompson, GHS mathematics teacher, and Al Spence. So with appreciation of their many years of service to the Granville schools and Granville students. We have 2 resignations, both another math teacher and a science teacher for a variety of different reasons. But we wish them well and appreciate the level of service that they've provided over the past several years. We have all of our 1-year, 2-year, 3-year, and continuing contracts with, again, the caveat that Polly Gorange is removed because of her resignation. And we have exempt employees contract as well, a volunteer, and then some extended time contract for our OT, PT, speech for services that will be provided during the summer. Any questions on the consent agenda?
Okay, take the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Rantel?
Aye.
Dr. Cornman?
Aye.
Okay,
Go ahead.
let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep
Yeah,
going.
on a roll.
All right, I'll have 2 different resolutions, one for the monthly financial report, one for the 5-year, adoption of the 5-year forecast. We'll go ahead and start with the monthly financial report.
So moved.
Second. Sorry, Amy, go ahead.
Okay. If you look in the financial report, yet again, it was a boring month. Those are always good from a
Yeah.
financial standpoint. Really not much went on during the month. Our revenues were pretty much where we expected, as was our spending. We are running a little high right now in our materials and supplies, but that's because we were a little bit more forceful in sticking to getting teachers to put requisitions in before spring break this year and emphasize that more, so that we're not scrambling, trying to close the year out. And the teachers actually did a great job of adhering to the schedule. So a lot of that spending has been moved forward. We have more spending in April, and I think we'll have less in May and June than we've had in prior years. And that's the main thing that's driving that. Again, you saw the cash balance. If you look at the spending and revenue relative to where we should be on pages, lost my pages, 8 and 9. No.
8's good, still.
What?
9 and 10.
Yeah, basically our spending is right and revenue are both right where they should be at this point of the year. Again, with only 2 months left in the year, actually they are on 11 and 12.
Okay.
Is what I meant. It's the bottom right corner of 11 and 12. You can see both the revenue received through April as a percentage is right in line with the last 2 years, and the spending is also, it's a tiny bit ahead, but for the most part, within an acceptable range ahead. And you heard most of the rest of the financial projection earlier, and the uncertainty that we have. So, any questions just about the monthly report?
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Rentel,
Aye.
Ms. Deeds,
Aye.
Dr. Corman.
Aye.
Thank you. The other item is the actual adoption of the formal 5-year forecast with the instructions then for me to go ahead and file it with the state. The actual forecast is towards the back of your packet of documents. It is the one with all the little print in it. And basically reflecting what we talked about in my presentation.
So moved.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? No? All right, take the roll.
Ms. Deeds.
Aye.
Dr. Rentel.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Dr. Corman.
Aye.
Okay, well, I think we start the conversation.
I think we do. Can I run this back? Sure.
Yeah, you run to there.
Temporary pause. And stretch.
Yeah.
In soccer practice, we would be doing jumping.
That's good. I just texted him to see how close he was.
He got in at 7:30.
Yeah.
And quickly the luggage comes in.
It is so warm in here.
I'm all right.
Are you?
I don't have a jacket on. Yeah, it's curtain time. So while we're waiting, not to put you on the spot, Mrs. Ormond, but
Oh, she's talking.
I know, Lisa, not to put you on the spot or anything, but since we have a moment, Washington DC was good?
Yes, it went really well, yes. Hopefully your son said the same thing.
He did. It was a great trip, yeah.
That's on my bus, so.
I thought he was on Mr., social studies teacher.
Mr. Universe.
Stuart?
Thank you.
Yes, well, we were both on the same bus.
Oh, you were on the same bus? Oh, okay, no, okay, right. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we lucked out with great weather, so.
Oh, yeah.
Nice. And then I didn't have to wear a jacket at all, so.
That's great.
That was
That's
lovely, yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Great.
We got
The
com-
White House was pretty good.
That's really neat. You got a chance to do that.
Had we been there like 1 hour later, we would have been there during the lockdown.
Yeah.
There was a lockdown. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
About an hour after we got out, there was a lockdown. Someone was flying a drone.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yes.
Surprised the kids didn't come up with that one.
Oh, yeah.
Social studies emergency at home, so if you see me texting back and forth.
About that. Straight into the work, right?
So is he on his way? Did you hear from him
He
again?
hasn't responded, which is good, because he's probably driving,
Driving.
so.
Yeah.
Except he's got one of those cars where he can talk to it and it can text you,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
We'll start the discussion.
Yeah. There is no action item
No.
associated with this, so it really is just to inform a future decision.
So remind me again. I want to ask this. So is there any place where the student handbook for not everything else beyond athletics and this
The
I
academic,
think that'll come up in
commonality?
the discussion, but can I let Jeff frame the conversation?
Yeah,
He
sure.
wants to give us some background
Yeah.
on where it's come from
Yeah.
and where, the committee that's.
correct. So several months ago, the board directed.
Wait,
the-
just to be formal, for anybody who's not following the agenda, this is our board discussion for this evening. so
Yes,
this
thank
will
you.
be, postponed from earlier on.
Yes,
All right, sorry,
thank
go
you,
ahead.
sorry. So several months ago, the board directed the administration to look at our current substance abuse policy, which is part of our athletic handbook, and it's our alcohol, tobacco, and drug policy. And in combination, look at the potential for a random drug testing policy. That is still not being pushed at this time. We still are in the deliberation stage from an administrative perspective on the random drug testing policy. This is really just about the level of consequence for violations of our current substance abuse policy. Currently, the policy says for the first offense, it is 10% of the season, whatever that equates to a game perspective. The committee is currently recommending moving that from 10% to 50% for the first offense. And then the second offense would be a year ban from the sport, and then or activity, and then the third would be no more extracurriculars for the rest of their time frame in Granville schools. So before I present an actual policy to you, there were some members on the committee that felt like 50% was too much. So I just wanted to calibrate with you to say, okay, what do you think from an acceptable perspective is a good first level deterrent? Because we obviously want the policy to be a deterrent for students that don't want to participate. But also, there will always be a component of education involved in the discipline process. So we're just calibrating between the 10 and 50%, and I'm looking for guidance from the board.
Every offense, though, is coupled with counseling and, substance abuse education.
Correct.
No matter what, like, even with the 10% currently.
We offer and recommend it.
But it's not required?
Not for, like in expulsions, sometimes we say we will hold it in abeyance if you go and get this type of counseling or something like that, and then we will reduce it at that time. Our current policy doesn't allow that reduction. So we do require it if they want to come back and participate.
And this pertains only to students taking part in extracurriculars?
Correct.
Athletics only, or all
This
extracurriculars?
is athletics only currently. Now, the substance abuse or the random drug testing policy, we're looking at expanding that, but right now this is just for the the interscholastic athletics.
Why?
What
Why isn't this
is-
also for,
We've never had a policy
Yeah,
that's
the policy
for other
has-
extracurriculars. Huh,
Yeah,
okay.
that's accurate.
Well, that was kind of why I was asking,
Yeah.
where's the boundary or the overlap between what's considered, is it athletics has a particular policy versus, and it might be the same policy, but it's just articulated separately, and then there's everything else,
Yeah.
meaning the school day, other activities that are not
Right.
athletics, representation of the school at the Peach Bowl,
Right.
whatever.
right?
So there's a delineation by the Supreme Court about what falls in our student code of conduct versus our extracurricular handbook. So if it's a policy of our student code of conduct, we can assign penalties that are aligned with the student handbook. We cannot use the extracurricular to impact a curricular, so band. So band is considered a curricular experience. If a student misbehaves there, then it's part of our student code of conduct, not our extracurricular.
But when you say extracurriculars, to me, that means more than the athletics, right?
Athletics.
Okay,
Athletics,
okay.
yeah.
No.
But are we,
So currently, the policy only applies to athletics,
right?
That's correct.
not
This
other
10%,
extracurriculars.
50% that
Yes.
we're
What?
discussing.
And drama.
It does.
Yeah,
And trauma.
yeah.
Okay.
So
So those
I would say it
athletics and
does
drama
not,
Are our only
Because that's
extracurricular
not
activity?
a co-curricular activity.
Because they don't take
Or-
classes and get credit for,
Right.
or do
correct.
they?
No,
No.
Okay.
they don't.
It was
So there-
considered a performance, much like the athletic events, therefore it was included in the policy, I want to say,
Mhm.
6 to 8 years ago.
Yeah.
It was added to that as well. Mock trial was in there as well.
Mhm.
It's kind of
Yeah.
things that were added along the way for whatever reasons.
Hmm?
So, but those are our only other extracurricular
Like,
activities?
so, Ryan, would you like to stand up here for a second? Because I want to ask you a couple of questions.
You're going to require my knowledge of.
Yes, yes,
Thanks.
yes. I want you to think back to when you were the high school
Yeah,
principal.
yeah, that's-
So long ago.
So long ago.
So if a student were to violate the code of conduct in general, and they are participating in robotics, is there any
Yes.
penalty?
Yeah, while they're suspended, they're not allowed to participate in any school functions.
Okay,
Or anything like that. So the difference where the athletic policy is, it's a year-round policy,
right,
where the robotics is not impacted by anything a student does in the summer, for example.
okay.
But but the violation has to occur at an athletic event, correct? Or is it
No.
if a student happens to have a violation during the school day?
Or at a school
not-
function.
Or at a school function that is not part of an athletic event, they still get the
School
the
con-
suspension, for example, plus they also get the
Yeah.
athletic
Let's say there was
penalty,
like a
right?
violation at a basketball game. That's still considered part of the school day at that time. They're representing the school, they're at a school function, even if it's at an away game, that would be handled under the school policy, not the athletic policy. Now, if they were an athlete, it would fall under, they would get a school suspension, but they would also have athletic
That's
consequences
what I
for
was
that.
asking.
It would be both.
So if they're an athlete, they have both applied no matter where the violation occurred
Correct.
at the basketball game or in the hallway during the school day?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Athletics is considered a privilege,
Correct.
not a right.
But aren't clubs also?
Yes.
So this would not apply to clubs then also?
It currently does.
It
not.
currently does not. It could.
It could.
It
Yes.
could.
But it does if you're in trauma.
That's
But
drama
drama
and
except
mock
for
trial.
drama.
Or,
The drama piece was added by, I mean, I'm going to say this was at least, I'm going to guess and say 6 to 8, when I said 6 to 8, I was really thinking it was 8 years ago, because it was considered performance, just like an athletic
Right.
performance, and they practice, and they have this long season, for each play, much like an athletic season. That's why it was included.
that makes sense.
But because this is a board policy, you do have the right to influence
Right.
what it currently states.
Well, that's what I also had a question about was, because I looked at what's in the athletic handbook, and then what's on our online policy. It doesn't delineate the consequences. The online policy doesn't delineate the consequences.
That's correct.
And so, but.
It's usually the board policy is usually a general policy.
Right.
And then the specificity happens in the handbook.
Right, so, but this is usually what we vote on. We don't, I guess we approve the handbook.
Yeah, we
So
approve
because
the-
by
exactly.
the approval of the handbook, we are.
That's
okay.
correct.
Okay, that's the mechanism that allows us to.
Yes.
implement this.
So Russ, just to bring you up to speed, welcome back.
Thank you. I apologize for being
Congratulations
here.
also.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
being
you
here.
for being
Thanks,
here. And, yeah, you can,
Thank you.
thank you, Ryan.
Sorry, I didn't mean to run you off.
Don't
Yeah.
get comfortable.
Our current discussion is around the substance abuse policy. We were talking about what fits into that policy, what falls out of that policy versus athletics, or athletics versus clubs. And so Ryan was asking answering a couple of questions related to what is included and is not included.
Thank you.
So there was a committee that looked at this. Can I ask kind of who made up that committee, or what
Yeah.
factions, or how that was formed? Because
Yeah.
I'm impressed they came back with a recommendation to move from 10 to 50%, but
Yeah.
also that may reflect who is at the table
We
instead
had
of the
the
consensus.
current high school principal, the
Okay.
current athletic director, we had the current clinic health nurse.
Okay.
We had, let's see, who else was sitting in that room? the dean of students at the middle school, and we had one other person that I'm
Okay.
blanking on.
Coach,
That was
or-
part of that, yes, there was a coach.
Okay.
So, but really, they had two different directions to pursue. One, the current alcohol and tobacco policy, the substance abuse policy that is currently in place, and then also, would they recommend moving to a random drug testing policy? We're not talking about that right now, we're just talking about the current policy. And calibrating between 10 and 50.
And what was
As a
their-
first offense.
Their
what was their right?
recommendation was 50.
And why?
Because they wanted it to be a significant deterrent, and although they also recognize that that could be a significant deterrent to the point where a person just would not come back. And so they worried about losing students participating in our athletic program, and we do know that that's a protective factor.
Right.
So if they are engaged, that's a benefit to
Right.
them.
Yeah.
That was my one concern in engaging this, was that it's got to be a balance between, and I guess I have two questions. One, is the purpose of the policy to be a deterrent? And that is the purpose of the policy. And two, it has to be a balance between what we know benefits the child in terms of participation and, I guess, whatever we decide the other purpose of the
Right.
policy is, if it
Well,
in fact
I-
is to be a deterrent.
I think it is a deterrent, but it's also an education opportunity. So we try and always balance the punishment with the educational aspect. So again, we are always trying to make sure that the point is made, but the support is there if a child needs that support.
How often might this obtain?
I'm sorry?
How often might this obtain?
How often do we
The
implement?
policy.
We
Typically.
had 17 instances in 2013-14. So it does happen.
When you say instances, that's a confirmed.
Confirmed, they met the criteria established in the current policy. And usually that's because they've gotten in trouble outside of school related to something that is public, and we can verify it.
The exclusion from the season applies whether or not the season is ongoing when the infraction
Correct.
occurs?
Correct.
So
They're-
if it happened in the spring and they're a fall sport,
Yes.
it starts in the fall.
It's their next,
It's
it
their
can
next
either
season.
be, if they're participating in a spring sport, it can be that spring sport. If they're participating in fall, it's that next consecutive.
What about, like, it happens in the spring, but then tryouts for fall sport? Do they miss tryout?
No, I believe that they can try out.
They're allowed to practice, there's not
Yeah.
allowed to.
Oh, not
Participate.
compete, but they can
Compete.
practice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's the penalty.
You want to keep, the thought behind that was keep them engaged
Right.
in the team is more likely to
Have
keep
that,
them out of trouble.
right, have that
Yes.
protective,
Exactly.
and retain that protective factor of participation.
Is there if someone is caught and subject to the punishment, is there also an education or remediation factor involved? I mean, it seems to me maybe one of the appropriate, not consequences is the wrong word, but maybe one of the appropriate remedies here is if they're suspended, there's also a requirement to participate in some sort of prevention program.
Yes.
And do we tie the successful completion of that to eligibility to return to action?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So, was there, and I'm asking, this may be nuanced, football has 9 games a year.
Mhm.
Baseball or another sport has 20-plus
20-some,
games a year. And I don't know that you find a way to equalize, or even whether it's appropriate to equalize, but was there any discussion about, seasons that are shorter versus seasons that are longer? Is that something that's even feasible?
It was, it was a minimal discussion from what I gleaned from the group. They basically said a percentage is the easiest to enforce. Now, when you're talking about if we were to extend it to all extracurriculars, we would have to differentiate between percentage of events and maybe a time frame, like a 6-week ban from participating in a club.
Are there kind of best practices out there or other districts that we can learn from, or is there a way that we can get a sense of how others have dealt with this and what direction we could head there?
I think this is one of those policies that has a wide variety of approaches to it. Even those that have, random drug testing policies, some are minimal, some are maximum. So there's a wide range. I would say in general, our current policy of 10% is below the average. I would say 50% would probably be above the average.
If I'm thinking of the leap from 10 to 50, and then when you talked about the other consequences for multiple offenses, why do you get 3 opportunities?
I think that general notion of 3 strikes you're out.
Right.
I don't know if it came from our parents or what. Typically.
Because the point is
3 opportunities.
to deter the behavior from the beginning. So you're kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth if you say we want to deter it, but we're going to give you 3 opportunities to not stop, essentially, right? So that finding that
I would
that
say
piece in the first opportunity between
would-
that 10 and 50, I think is much more important.
And I would say this without any real hard proof, because I haven't looked at that data, but I would say it's extremely rare for a student to move beyond the second offense.
So the third one really isn't.
But it could, so it could be stated that it is a deterrent, because kids aren't moving into the second and third level of offenses or being caught.
Does that argue then for moving that clearly if 50% is too much, maybe 40%, maybe it needs to be, somewhere where, because you really don't want them to try that third
Correct,
time,
yes.
right? And so
That's
you
correct.
really, that deterrence is really very important at the front end.
Right.
Was there I don't know how to ask this question without you having to answer it in too revealing a fashion, but given the different responsibilities of the people on the committee, was the split between the different extremes
Administrative versus
or
general
just-
staff?
or people that were, their role was more the advocacy and well-being of the child versus the athletic side?
Not necessarily. There were people on both sides that were counter.
Okay.
But I don't want to get into the prospect of the random drug testing, because I know
Right.
that's still under consideration. One of the concerns I have with respect to our policy is that we are probably out of necessity talking about consequences. Are we also adequately addressing
The prevention.
The prevention, the discovery? I mean, you mentioned there are 16, 17 incidents in the last year or two. I suspect that there are many more that are not as verifiable because we don't
Right.
have a public record. I think we have to look at, it's not about catching, it's about preventing.
Correct.
But if the net is so wide that we're only catching, the 1%, 10%, 50%, don't know what it is, but we're not catching enough, then the penalties aren't an adequate deterrence. I guess what I'm saying is I think we need to make sure we look at the whole policy to make sure that not only are the consequences significant enough as a deterrence, but our ability to intercede and subject someone to the consequences serves as a deterrent as well. That students believe that it's not worth it because they are likely to get caught, as opposed to believing they're highly unlikely to get caught. That's a tough standard, is a real slippery slope, I know.
Yes.
And we don't want to be guessing and, making random accusations and assumptions. So I don't have an answer for what that is. I guess I'm asking, are we looking at that in this, with as much, with as keen an eye as we're also looking at the penalty side of things?
Let me state it this way. Equal weight was given to a conversation about what is happening K through 12 from an educational perspective. There were gaps identified in grade levels where we were not doing as much as we could from a preventative educational perspective. So we looked at potentially buying some additional resources for not only our guidance staff, but also our clinic staff and our district school nurse to use to educate students about the dangers of using substances, illegal substances. So equal weight was given to that pursuit as well. So there are multiple ways to get to the end point, whether it be preventative, punitive, or a combination of the two in the middle. And I think what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a little bit more weight behind the initial consequence, because we believe that 10% is too small. And so I think everybody's in agreement with that. It's just, is 50% too much?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very appropriate discussion, and I would, one who says 10% is not a significant enough consequence. And I guess I don't have an answer for this. I want to make sure we're also looking at the standard, the burden of proof for subjecting someone to that consequence. If it's
Meaning
if
it
it's
should be
so,
lower?
I don't know that I don't know. I'm hesitant to say that.
Yeah.
But I also believe that it is a very high standard, maybe appropriately so, and therefore that's not a deterrent.
Right.
Well, I was thinking, when you were talking, I was thinking about the situation that occurred at the prom, or before the prom. And the thing that, aside from the whole situation, one of the things that keeps bubbling up in my head is that there were, I'm assuming, students on the bus that were there very innocently. But as I had sort of said, nobody came forward except the bus driver. And I'm sure, even though I don't have any proof, that many, many students who were not involved knew what was going on, yet did not have a way to care for the trouble that their friends were getting themselves into. And I don't know how a policy can address that, but I really feel like that's also something that really has to be addressed in this piece, where the environment, whether it's part of the prevention piece, because I think just educating kids about the danger, it's like Charlie Brown's teacher, blah,
Sure.
blah, 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 right? And a lot of that has to come from how the kids treat themselves, the respect they have for one another and their own health, and their own self-esteem and their own self-confidence, and all of those things. So,
I think we would not have brought the conversation of a random drug testing policy to the board and had that conversation if we didn't feel like we needed to do something in order to confirm that some of these things were happening and we weren't able to verify them. And so I think that is one vehicle to get beyond the reasonable suspicion threshold. And so I think that's why that is still on the table. Because as Mr. Burnett said, athletics, clubs, parking, those are not rights that our students have, they're privileges. And therefore, we can put together a framework that says, based on these expectations, you can participate. And so, therefore, we have a little bit more wiggle room to raise the expectation and have a different burden of proof, so to speak. But I think that is probably why we're still having this conversation, because we do believe that the abuse of substances happens across all high schools.
Sure.
But we want to be as protective as we can, utilize the educational process and support kids through that process, but also teach them the lessons that they need to learn. So that is a roundabout answer to your question.
It makes sense, and I
Yeah.
think Katie's spot on. We can do a lot of things, but really, if there's going to be a successful effort to curb some of this use, it's going to be the result of peer-to-peer pressure.
Yeah.
And
Including parent to parent.
right. Right.
But I think there probably are roles within the district that can help with that. And I think, coaches and extracurricular leaders are influential people for kids, right? And, what I think we're speaking to is really a cultural change, right? And I don't think policy is necessarily the best way to make a cultural change. Hopefully it reflects the culture. But I think, and I've had coaches approach me to say that, hey, the current policy is really weak and it's kind of a joke. Right? And here's the coaches coming to me with that, right? So I would like to give them support, right? And I'd really like to see our extracurricular leaders and all of our district find a way to help with this and imply or impose their own standards above and beyond what some policy might be. And I think that might carry more weight. If the district policy is 25% and the coach says, hey, if I see this as a problem for you, I don't mind taking you out of half the season, right? I think that's maybe that might resonate more. It might give us that additional channel for communication, right? Because I think that
I would caution.
I'm just saying, I don't know what the other mechanisms are. Maybe
Right.
that's not a functional one.
Right.
And I'm not sure we want to leave it to that either.
Right.
But I think that the whole point is how do we start the conversation?
Yes.
How do we raise the awareness? What are the channels for doing that? Whether it be coaches or athletic director beginning of the season meeting or what, the policy is one channel for communication.
Right.
But I think there's lots of others that we need to foster somehow.
I agree. And I do agree with your statement on cultural. It has to be a grassroots effort to have people engage in that process, that conversation. I don't know that we can have different coaches enforcing different policies and different levels of consequences, because then you get into, you just don't like me.
But it's us as the unified leadership of the district that's setting that policy, so that's
Correct.
where it needs to be. I mean, that's
Yeah.
why that doesn't really work.
Right.
Because we're the ones who say, well,
Right.
here's what our standard is. And I think the other piece that goes along with that Ryan talked about is, it's not a right. It is not a right. It is not a sense of entitlement to play a sport.
Right.
It is a privilege, and it is also a privilege that is in some ways, very different from, not all, but some of the extracurricular activities, because they're much more high profile. And there is a while I would say that perhaps the robotics team might be inching up towards the recognition that some of the sports teams have, there aren't that many other groups that have the kind of representational also role that an athletic team has for the community. And so I think that those also speak to, maybe 50% is a lot, but maybe it's really got to be up close to that because of all these other attendant pieces that go along with what it means to have this privilege of representing your school and being an athlete.
I don't know, I think there's other extracurricular, I mean, if you think about an academic team or Envirothon team or FCCLA, you know, I think those all have representation for the district. So maybe there's an opportunity to like broaden, and maybe that's a communication mechanism, right? There's a communication mechanism with you where you reach out to more students, right, and effectively start this conversation in more places by grouping in more extracurriculars or clubs or whatever, and I'm not sure if those are all appropriate or not, or we pick and choose based on where we think. But maybe that's the way to start the communication moving a little further. I don't know.
And Brian and Lisa, help me with the history. At one point, the initial policy was recommended at 25%, and it was back down to 10?
I think it was 20.
It was 20?
I think it was 20.
Okay, and it was back down to 10? Okay. So I think the board at that time felt like 20 was too much, moved it down. I think we're leaning towards the other direction. And so I guess I don't necessarily know from the board right now
Oh, yeah.
any further understanding, so I'm going to push a little
And
harder.
this is not a number. I am intrigued by both Russ's and Katie's identification of the power of peer influence. Is there any mechanism by which a student who was concerned about a friend could anonymously initiate some kind of intervention?
We actually, the bullying hotline or the
Right.
support line
Right.
is usually where kids will report, or they just go into the administration's office and say, hey, I'm
worried
concerned.
about.
Yeah, and that happens quite regularly.
Really?
Yes.
Can we, encourage more kids to, because I'm sure there are still a number who
Mhm.
feel as though it's narking, or, which
Mhm.
literally it is, I suppose, but.
Sure.
The
I
culture
think-
needs to be that
yeah.
that's the positive thing to do, not to turn
Right.
away
Mhm.
and ignore it.
And I think that's part of that cultural piece that Thomas talked about, and also that educational piece.
Do you have, if a counseling session is indicated, is there any way of following up to determine whether or not,
Verifying it and.
well, not just that they were sitting there, but that it may have.
Brian, you've probably had more of those
Success.
conversations with people,
To verify if they finished the council.
well, that it had value.
That it had value, thank you, that was
Yeah.
what I was trying to.
I mean, you get different answers from different students as they go through it. Some it's a nuisance and something that they have to do, but maybe there's some value that it's a nuisance. Some it's really, they've gone on with treatment beyond the treatment that they actually received because they had such a positive reaction to it. I would say that's probably less frequent than
Right.
before, so.
Right. The feedback I've gotten has been parental, and it seemed that the particular session was not particularly beneficial.
We don't dictate to whom they go.
Correct. They have choice in who the,
It's gotta be a license.
yeah.
The license, but we don't say.
Right, exactly.
So that we don't have any.
We give-
We give them options provided they're in Licking County.
Okay.
Mhm.
You're looking for,
Give me a number.
Give me a
Give me a number.
Let's just, so
What can I do?
Yeah.
we want to go more than 10, obviously, right?
But I just want to quick, because does it matter what we do at the first level versus second versus third? Since it was in the handbook, I guess what is going to be proposed or
Right.
currently proposed. you know, the third one says you're banned forever.
Yeah.
And the second one is you're out for a year.
Correct.
I mean, does what we do at the first level, I mean, do we need to have that discussion too, or is it really just this
I would
first
say
level that?
for the impact of the majority of kids, it's that first level.
Yeah.
That is probably the most important decision.
Can I ask one question? You may well have discussed this before I walked in. I apologize if that's the case. Are we drawing any distinctions in the policy, or has it been considered, as to whether somebody self-reports or is caught?
There is a distinction in the self-reporting,
Okay.
Yeah.
so it is a lesser penalty.
Got it.
What is it?
Well, it will be 10%. So we're assuming that there's going to be an increase.
In
So,
self-reporting?
yeah.
You know, it's not a fully formed opinion, which is often the case with me. But if the second penalty is you lose the season, and the third penalty is the lifetime ban, then I don't think that 50% for the first penalty is really beyond the pale. I mean, I think it's significant, as it ought to be, because it becomes, you know, significant thereafter. I think, you know, if you went 10% and then a season ban and then
Right.
so you know,
So
I'm
you-
not uncomfortable talking about a 50% penalty.
Okay, and that's good for me to hear.
I'm not uncomfortable with it either.
Okay.
I guess I'm just regularly surprised by our community, because I'm just not connected to it, the diversity of perspectives on this within families.
Very much.
Right. And I don't know how to get the consensus number, because I don't think there is one, or a consensus opinion on it. But I think that we sort of have a responsibility to lean toward the most conservative, right? And so in that sense, or although I'm sure there's, again, a wide range of what people would like to see here, right? I don't think that we have the option of like picking the average, right? Or lowballing it or whatever, right? I think we need to set the highest standard somehow, right? Because there's certainly a portion of our community that feels that's what's recommended, and this committee as well has come forth with a recommendation, right? That they think is going to be the right one. So where I think it might get some pushback from lots of people, including the community and so forth, I don't know how to include their perspective or include everyone in the discussion of what we really want to do, which is change the culture, right?
Well, it will definitely,
Yeah.
will come back in June as a first reading of a
Okay.
policy, and then July, we will formalize whatever change we make. So,
So maybe we make a call out to anyone to, you know, reach forth to one of us or to the administration or whatever
Or to
with
do
perspectives.
public comment at
And
that
public
June
comment would be
meeting.
more than welcome, right?
mhm.
Yeah, I would hope that we'll circulate this as broadly as possible, and if we talk about
I have a feeling Chuck
Drug-
is typing away.
talk about the drug testing in
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the same fashion, and, you know, circulate it to the teams. The other thing, and it may be nothing, and it may be optics, but I would like this to be the substance abuse prevention policy as opposed to the substance abuse policy. Because
Mhm.
really, that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
Is do everything we can to prevent this issue. And the punishment is not punishment for punishment's sake, it's designed to be a deterrent.
Correct.
So,
The other piece of this is to hypothetically say we make it 50%. The point of this is so that someone doesn't make a
An
mistake.
additional decision, or, you know, one, it serves as a deterrent up front, and that they don't make consecutive
Right,
bad choices.
and a child who is already in trouble, this is probably not going to deter them, because if they're a regular abuser, this is not going to make a difference to them.
No.
Because they've probably got a deeper problem,
That was going to be
right?
my question, was is there any distinction that we need to make between, you know, the kid who just made a bad choice, and we all make bad choices, and, you know, the kids who are, you know, for whom this policy is not going to, and does that play into how
Well,
big of a consequence we make the
I
first
still think the
level?
boundary needs to be firm, because the important thing, even though being in a sport is a protective factor, having boundaries for kids are also, clear boundaries are also, is also as a protective factor. And we all know, either as parents or as teachers or coaches, that kids, we are all geared as humans to push that envelope. How much can I get out of this situation to my own benefit? Because we're all, programmed to do that. So to some degree, that's why boundaries are really important. To say, this is where the safety line is, and that's really important that you understand that. So this is, whatever this percentage is, this is the statement that we're saying that we feel is important enough that you need to take note of this.
With the implication of a drug testing policy, which is not what we're talking about right now.
Right.
Is there flexibility within that to integrate it more closely?
Yes.
Right, such that, okay, so there was a one-time mistake, but you're willing to do testing over a period of time to show that
And that's
you've learned from
exactly
that.
what
Whereas, if you're not willing to do that testing and so forth, there might be a different consequence, right? And I'm not sure how we integrate that policy, or if there's an example of that. That might be a way to attack this, one-time mistake, boy, I learned my lesson, right? I don't want to be out for X amount of time, right? But I am willing to demonstrate that I've gone through the thing, and I've really taken this to heart and learned something from it. I don't know if we want to go there or not.
Most substance abuse policies or random drug testing policies have, if there's an initial red flag, that there's a required 5 additional tests or
Okay.
3 additional tests for that exact reason.
Carrying on my daughter's line?
And
does that
honestly.
does that lower their punishment then, if they are willing
No.
to subject themselves to,
No, they have to subject themselves to,
Yeah.
if they want to return.
at all?
At all.
That's why I kind of asked the question
Okay.
about, is there, there's a distinction if you self-report.
Correct.
Maybe it's idealistic, but one would hope if somebody made a one-time mistake and the consequences were significant enough that they were fearful that they
Right.
would self-report it, and, and then there may
And I
be some.
think that's why if we land at 50 and we have 10, that's a substantial change.
Mhm.
And we may have more kids orient towards, I made a mistake, I'm going to self-report.
But they can't self-report a second time, because that would be a second offense, correct?
Correct.
So that would have to be clear.
Well, I feel comfortable, I'm hearing that you're comfortable with having a stiffer penalty for the first offense. And I just wanted to make sure that, because the administrative side was working on this side, and I just wanted to make sure my governance team was in line with that thinking, so that when we come together, we have a policy that is effectively able to be implemented.
10% is definitely not a deterrent.
I agree with you.
And so
We all agree with
I think we all
that. Yeah,
agree with
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So that I think it definitely needs to be significantly higher.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, we're not uncomfortable with a discussion about 50%.
Yeah.
And if we bring that to the next meeting, I think then we can have public discussion
first
around it.
policy reading.
It's just the first policy read, and if there are a lot
Yeah.
of objections, or we hear otherwise, then we can always change it before we do the second read.
Thank you.
Is that-
That's exactly what I needed.
okay.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Wow, that was quick.
Didn't even ask for the motion.
All right, so that was Katie
Yes.
and Amy.
A well-oiled machine.
Dr. Rentel,
Aye.
Ms. Deeds.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Janice.
Aye.
Dr. Corn.
All right.